Hey guys, I was talking with a patient the other day and we got to talking about nutrition, and I had an idea for a way to simplify my framework a little bit. I think I've discussed my framework in the past. It's got all the boxes. It starts with the standard American diet and has dietary restriction and time restricted feeding and all the different types of fasting. And ultimately I find that very helpful. But in talking to this patient, I sort of wrote out something a lot simpler that might be a great way to summarize it. So I have that piece of paper and I thought I'd walk people through it. So if you sort of think of three axes or three levers, like an X, Y, Z axis, instead think of CR, DR, and TR. And that basically becomes the three things that you can manipulate. So let me sort of walk you through this. So you have three axes, as you can see: DR, CR, and TR. So DR is restricting some element within the diet. So if you want to restrict carbohydrates, restricting animal protein, restricting fat, whatever that is, that would be a form of DR, or dietary restriction. So that's the what you eat part. Conversely, TR is restricting the timing of meals, the when you eat part. So everybody's probably quite familiar with that, but a 16-8 or an 18-6 feeding window are pretty common, meaning you would not be eating during 18 hours. You would limit your eating window to, say, 6 hours in that situation. So that's the second lever that you can be pulling. The third one is the total amount that you eat, the amount of caloric restriction. So restricting the total quantity consumed. So that's sort of the how much of what you eat. So again, take a step back and think about all of the sort of half-baked and fully baked and reasonably well thought out and not reasonably well thought out dietary schemes out there. They basically all are distilled down into these three constitutive elements. It's what you're eating, when you're eating, how much you're eating. And the way I view this is we should always be pulling at least one of these levers. So that's kind of like what I call macro goals here. You always want to be pulling one of these levers. To not be pulling one of these levers is to be consuming the standard American diet, right? If you're just eating as much as you want of whatever you want, whenever you want, that's called the standard American diet. And if you're doing that, congratulations. Understand that only about 10 to 20% of you doing that are going to be able to do that and not get sick in the long run. So for most of us, certainly myself included, that strategy is an abject failure, and we have to come up with alternatives to that. So I always want to be pulling one of these levers, either delaying my feeding window, being more thoughtful about what it is I'm eating, or just restricting the total amount. I think often, frankly, I want to be pulling two. So I spend most of my life in this state, which is to say I'm usually vacillating back and forth between time restriction and dietary restriction. So today, for example, first thing I ate wasn't until 2 p.m. So that's timing restriction. And what am I restricting these days? I'm not really restricting much except for sugar. I basically don't eat sugar, and I don't eat, sort of junky processed carbohydrates. But I wouldn't say I'm carbohydrate restricted per se. I mean, last night for dinner I had chicken and potatoes, so not exactly restricting carbs. And then finally, every once in a while, you want to actually pull on all three levers. And that could be sort of a periodic period of fasting, either complete fasting and water only, in which case you're absolutely restricting all of these, or even something like a fast mimicking diet or a reduced calorie fast. So anyway, a little long video, I know, for Instagram, but nevertheless, I thought it would be helpful. This is the way to think about things in my mind, and this is how we think about it with our patients, and I hope it's helpful for you as well. But whenever somebody tells you about their new crazy fancy diet, sort of try to anchor it to this. Is this a way to mimic TR, CR, DR? And don't be so myopic that you're only thinking about one of these things. Rather, think about how you should always be thinking about all of them and deciding on how you want to toggle your attention back and forth between them. So there you have it, the least succinct, most succinct way I could explain nutrition.